Welcome, everyone. You are listening to episode 24 of They Might Be Self-Aware. I am Hunter Powers, joined by, as always, the one, the only,
the Daniel Bishop.
Daniel Bishop!
It's
here.
Me! Hi,
hey,
Hunter.
Daniel. How are you?
I'm good, and I'm going to tell you the stuff that we're talking about today.
What are we talking about?
We're going to be talking about AI and culinary science. What is a cornelé and why did I make some?
Ooh. Also going to talk about the AI. Is AI getting the new high score in the video game industry?
Speaking of video games, Super Mario has vowed to never use generative AI to save the princess.
Speaking of Japan-related video games, what do the Amish and apparently 40% of Japan companies have in common?
Every time a bell rings, a new AI model gets its wings and released upon the world.
Speaking of those AI models, we'll take a look at our friend Claude 3.5 Sonnet, who is helping us collaborate on our projects.
I'm glad I don't have dashes and numbers in my name. And speaking of people that don't have dashes and numbers in their name, Sam Altman, is the Senate coming for him, or is there some sort of backdoor friendship forming?
Sam Altman 2.0. It's coming soon.
Sam Altman
but speaking
3.5 Sonnet
of new releases, we've got new releases from Mistral, Meta, and others. And do they spell doom for OpenAI?
And lastly,
yes.
Speaking of OpenAI, I'm going to give you 5 billion reasons not to start your own.
That's a lot of reasons. Well, we've got a jam-packed episode for you because you are listening to...
They might be self-aware.
Hunter, I'm hungry.
What else is new?
You know what? That's true. I'm always hungry. That's my secret. But
is it still tacos?
No, I'm not on tacos right now.
Oh.
I made an entirely new food stuff. I'm going to say we, and I don't mean you and I mean myself and
You've been cheating on me?
I've been using ChatGPT to come up with new food ideas. And then I actually made one of them. I've looked at this before. I've talked on the podcast of, hey, maybe I should try and make something using ChatGPT. And I'm going to show you the fruits of my labors. Yes, it is edible.
What is this?
So I have some Canelé molds. Canelés being a French custard baked sort of thing. You get it like really kind of caramelized on the outside, but it's like still sort of gooey on the inside. They're amazing. If you can find like a French bakery or at least a fancy snooty bakery, I'm sure you can find some of these things. Everyone go have one. They're great. I had just had cornbread the previous night for dinner.
With that?
Yeah, love cornbread. My family, we eat some cornbread with our meal, whatever. That's not the exciting part of the story. But cornbread's in my mind. I was putting stuff away. I see the Canelé molds, and I said, I never make Canelés because they're a pain. Like, to do them properly, you're supposed to use like beeswax and stuff like that.
Beeswax?
Yeah, to coat the thing.
I never knew that was edible.
The things that we do for authenticity. Anyways, I have these molds that I've not used except for one time because it's just too much of a pain in the butt to make these. And I really like cornbread. And I have cornbread on my mind. I look at this thing and I say, what if both of those at the same time? So, ChatGPT, I go over and I say, I want to make Canelés that are also cornbread. Just like think of what's both of these things, then meet me kind of halfway in the middle. Help me make a
so it's not cornbread in the mold. It is a fusion.
So I could have just looked up cornbread recipe. Yeah. I said, I want something that's halfway between a Canelé recipe and a cornbread recipe. Okay. And it came up with a recipe. And I said, okay, this is neat. A little bit of back and forth. I didn't just take the first recipe. I mentioned I have some corn extract. Could you like add that in? Oh yeah, sure. And it basically just added in.
It's corn extract is not corn oil. something else?
No, it's extract.
Okay.
I don't know what an extract is, it turns out. I guess you just take the essence of corn and you boil it down. It's probably like in an alcohol solution or something.
Like when I read the ingredients list on most of the things in the grocery store.
Yeah. Extract. Don't worry. Don't worry about it. It's corn.
And other
add
flavors.
some of that into like a base sugar cookie, and you'll get these really interesting corn sort of flavored cookies. Okay. That's a recipe for another time. So it adds that. One of the ingredients it has corn kernels, and I thought, I don't think I want like straight up corn kernels in my cornelés here.
Is it meant to be a dessert, by the way? This thing?
No, I mean they're sweet.
Okay.
I feel like the French can eat sweet pastries any time of day. So
okay,
you know, I'm really living my best sugar breadiest life.
Like when would one consume one of these? This is like a snack
when one is hungry.
Tea time type. This isn't like a
I
dinner
don't know.
roll.
I can ask, hey, when is the appropriate time to eat?
All right, sorry,
I think it's more of like a dessert. So anyway, a bit of back and forth. I don't want corn kernels. Okay, here's a different version of it. I looked through it. I'm like, is this really going to be as like custardy as a canelé would be? And it revises it again. Then I'm at the store and it says to take some cornmeal and then just run it through the blender to make it like into corn flour. I saw that there was masa harina, which is like a mixed sliced corn flour.
So I just asked it,
hey, would that be good? Yeah, exactly. Would that be good? Could I add that in there? Yes. Revised recipe. I bought the stuff necessary for it. From that set of ingredients and instructions. I read
the transcript. It seemed like every time you asked a question, it always just said, yeah, look, it's like, hey, do you think it'd be a good idea to add some raw sewage in it? Yes, let me revise the recipe. I felt like I was noticing that pattern. Is that
one of my messages in there is, I appreciate the yes and, but I'm more looking for just advice on this last one. And it still just said, yup, yeah, sounds like a good idea. All right, fine. You're right, though, that it is trying to be helpful, but I think that helpfulness has been tuned a little too much toward patting you on the back for what a good idea you had. No, I want some like criticisms here. Anyways, I have this set of ingredients, which we'll share with you, by the way. Take a look in the show notes and instructions. I followed it to the letter. I didn't change a darn thing. I didn't look up a canelé recipe or a cornbread recipe to be like, I don't know, this doesn't seem right. I literally just followed what it had.
Okay.
And at no point in the process was I referring to a canelé or a cornbread recipe, just a vague understanding of what's in it myself.
Right.
And I made them. And it looks like this. I mean, granted, this looks a lot like cornbread.
It does look like cornbread in the
and shape. It's in a canelé shape. I'm going to
for our audio listeners.
I'm going to mute myself for just a second, take a bite, and then you can see what it looks like on the inside.
All right, Daniel is taking a big bite for those listening at home. He's chewing it up. He's now showing us back the cornbread canelé combo. Looks smoothish from here. That could be the resolution of the camera.
I think it's the resolution. Okay. It looks like cornbread.
It looks like cornbread. Inside. He's giving a nod of approval as he finishes chomping down on his creation. Oh, there's a slight hesitation there. What has the AI done?
Just some light joking. I'm not used to eating with a commentary.
What will ChatGPT say? How many stars? How many stars is he giving it?
I give it as many stars as I'd give cornbread in general, I think.
Cornbread has a cap, a star cap. I mean, it is cornbread, but it's also just cornbread.
So what this is like a slightly eggier cornbread.
Okay.
In terms of how it tastes. I was hoping for something that my mind would say, this feels halfway between a canelé and cornbread.
Yeah.
But a canelé is a custard, and this, like, cornbread has a lot of, cornmeal in it. Sorry. I think it would have been hard to make something that really captures the feel of cornbread and a canelé. The textures are very, very different. This tastes nearly like a regular cornbread, but there is kind of a custardiness to it because there is a decent amount of egg involved in the recipe. I'd say on a scale of cornbread to canelé, this is like on a 1 to 10, this is like a 2, maybe a 3. I'd be very interested to see what a 6 or a 5 or so, or even like an 8 looks like. I want something that still eats just like a canelé, but has a hint of cornbread. It reminds you of cornbread. Maybe it has just some of the corn extract. I don't know. So I would say it is a light failure in terms of what I originally expected.
Yeah.
I'd say it is an unmitigated success in terms of I took these two concepts, combined them together, asked ChatGPT what seems like fairly weird challenge, and it immediately came up with a viable solution, even if it wasn't hitting dead in the middle of these sort of like two wildly different spaces.
From a prompt engineering perspective, you might play with having the model interview you about sort of, hey, there's a million different ways to tune this recipe. I'd like you to interview me and ask me, the top 20 questions that will help you dial in the perfect recipe for my, what I'm envisioning here. I have kind of a broad idea. Help me narrow it down.
That's really interesting. Like an AI interviewer.
Yeah, because you're getting into the subtle. What you're upset, or that's the wrong word. What you'd like to tweak is a lot of subtleties, and I wonder if,
right.
You told it that it is, the world's greatest pastry chef with 100 years of experience, and you're designing this new recipe for the, to please every possible sense of this individual. What are the questions that you ask in order to refine and. I don't know. That's an area I would explore.
Well, maybe the next time that I do this, I'll do 2 or 3 iterations of it and actually make it and then have it interview me back and forth to iterate on the recipe.
So they've previously told us you should no longer major in computer science because that's just a weird.
Culinary science is out the window now too.
I guess culinary science is out the window. I don't know. And I was stuck on computer science.
I had the idea. The person is still in the loop here. I'm the weirdo that said I want cornelés, not canelés and not cornbread. I want cornelés, and I just used ChatGPT to help do it.
Well, again, today there is still opportunity for this culinary expertise, culinary science, but just like there's still opportunity for computer science. However, belief or speculation or hypothesis is that tomorrow there will not be. I don't know. I guess another one is the video game industry. Is the video game industry one of the best industries to actually replace a bunch of people with AI? Like it's not just cost cutting.
No, I don't think so. Knowing what I know about generative AI, I think
thinking from an art perspective. There's tons of art
for like concept art and stuff like that. I've seen some people who've put together tools that can do texturing on models and things like that. We're getting into the point where you can generate 3D geometry from text, which is really incredible. I think there's a lot of possibility there, but in terms of truly disrupting a whole industry, non-generative AI, like just regular machine learning, data science, just computers, I don't know, a lot of like accounting or something feels like it's an easier do to me.
I asked because there was an article in Wired this week about AI disrupting the video game industry. Now, the video game industry is a high turnover industry to begin with.
Sure. There are a lot of people who are very poorly treated, and the hours are really bad. A lot of crunch. I think Blizzard just unionized.
I also think though it's kind of like the movie industry where companies form to create a game, and then when the game is over, if we're not going to continue updating it, the company kind of falls apart. Or again, they had the success of the one game. They now need to transition into 2 games. Like it's not uncommon for video game companies to go under or to exist for a relatively short period of time.
Sure. If you're a company that makes paper clips, you can just keep making paper clips forever. But you can't unless you're the folks behind Skyrim, I guess, keep re-releasing the same game over and over, and people will keep buying it.
And I guess, and especially in, new companies with new games, new IP, probably the odds of it being successful, well, it's, again, similar to making a movie. So is this going to turn into a franchise, or is this a one-off? And for it to be successful enough for the company to continue. In 2023, for this article, there were around 11,000-ish people that were laid off in that industry. But what this article called out now is as we're halfway-ish through 2024, they've already crossed the same layoff mark. So all the people that were let go last year, we've now hit that same mark halfway through this year, suggesting a really significant uptick. And they seem to be pointing the finger less to just the overall economy and more towards potential AI influence. And
I don't know which
primarily
specific roles are being lost, but I think it depends on what the roles are. If it's a bunch of concept artists being canned,
the artists are mainly what they talk about in the article.
Then, yeah, I think that's something you could absolutely point a finger at generative AI. If it's someone who's animating, making tools to make the people in the stands cheer in a soccer video game whenever you score, I don't think that's generative AI. I think that's other machine learning thing. That's other just programming. But that's
tools. Another area that's been advancing a lot. I mean, I've seen some incredible capture where they can capture on a webcam and animate a digital character incredibly effectively, whereas they used to have these giant, and they still use them as well, but motion capture rigs and lots of refinement of everything. And now it seems much closer to now just turn your webcam on and we can capture your performance.
I think it's in vogue, and I don't say that in a negative way, but it is somewhat in vogue to be more aware of technological advancement putting jobs at risk. This has been happening literally forever, but right now we're hyper aware of what's going on with regards to AI, and I say that in the biggest, scariest font that I can, taking jobs, which I don't mean to make light of. I think overall, we've talked quite a bit about what this means, how should we let people continue to have meaningful lives and roofs over their heads and so on. But tooling for everything will continue. We're going to see more automation over the years in automotive plants. We're seeing more automation as it relates to warehousing. We're seeing more automation as it relates to someone making a tool to put terrain together in Unity for video games. For everything, every kind of task that there is, people are always looking for ways to make easier. And AI, as bad for the environment or scary or controlled by a certain number of people or this or that or any of the negative or positive things about it, AI, machine learning, computers are somewhat driving a lot of those advances. And I think it's good for us to be aware of that. But it's not going to stop happening. We just need to make sure what of it happens is as fair as possible.
So do you support the hypothesis that recent innovations in AI are dramatically impacting jobs in the video game industry?
I would say yes. Yeah, I think so. Not a unqualified, I definitely know this and I'll stand before a Senate subcommittee and say yes, and here's the numbers. But it sure does seem like it.
And today
it will get worse over time too.
Well, today it's the art. There's certainly in the generative AI context, there are lots of things where people are, you describe the holodeck. There are lots of experiments in the realm of the holodeck where you describe the world that you would like to inhabit, and it builds a 3D representation of that. That has to be coming soon to video games. I guess another area that's been called out from a generative AI standpoint in the video game industry is characters, where both their dialogue scripted is written by AI, and then even voice, where they've captured they've modeled the voice of an actor they hired to
Speaking
say,
of losing some jobs, right?
yeah, 2 lines, or what was our 15 seconds. They hired the voice actor for 15 seconds, and then now that voice actor is voicing an entire game.
Yeah, you can have generated voices as well, where you don't even need an actor. Now, when I say you don't need an actor, I do think at least at this time, and you're right, progress will continue to march forward, and what it looks like 1 year, 10 years from now will be different. I don't think that generative voices have the same depth of performance as people do. Yet, still.
Right. I guess, we saw the demo now quite some time ago from OpenAI that they've yet to release. That's probably another thing. But,
right.
Showing a lot of emotion. And again, in its infancy, that's how good it is today.
Right. This is the worst it'll ever be.
Correct.
So, when it comes to video games, I think that we are going to see people lose their jobs. Voice actors, people who are doing concept art, maybe writers. I feel like writers is still a bit of a push. But as these jobs are lost, those jobs become tools that other people can use to create things themselves. There are a lot. Think of like how darn near impossible it would be without access to tools like Unity and Godot, G-O-D-O-T, Godot. I don't know how you're supposed to pronounce it, but all these different kinds of tools that are freely / cheaply available to people, let alone your like RPG maker type software. If every person who wanted to make a video game had to completely write all the software from scratch, there'd be a lot less video games out there. People made tools that made this more broadly accessible to people. The same sort of tools that are going to let you make music, that are going to let you make textures for 3D models, make the models, but you're going to do the 3D textures yourselves, whatever it ends up being. I don't want to make light of the negative aspect of certain people at certain companies will probably lose their jobs because this becomes just a tool instead. But I do think that that's going to open up the door toward more accessibility in this field.
Well, one company has said no to generative AI for now, for like at least the next week.
Plans, which means as soon as that interview was done, and now we have plans.
Well, we didn't have
Probably
plans. Not. And before that, they ran around and had a few people crumble up that plan. It cannot exist.
Right. Currently, we have no plans, and you just hear Shredder going in the background.
That company's Nintendo.
If anybody would say, we're putting our foot down, we're not going to do it, it would absolutely be Nintendo. They have this, well, it used to be the Nintendo seal of quality on like the NES games. But in my mind, and I don't know for sure how much this holds today, but I feel like it does. I certainly feel like it does. First party Nintendo games are of a very high quality, and there's a lot of effort put into them, a lot of thought. They're not churning out schlock. And so if anyone's going to say, we're not taking the quick route, we're going to do things, hand built, et cetera, it would be them.
I just imagined what I want. I want a generative NES game where you blow into the cartridge and there's a bunch of sensors in there, and it's that input that generates the game. So every time you blow in the cartridge, you get a different game that is signed only to that particular.
Right. So you're saying that you're using human lungs and playing a cartridge like it's a harmonica to generate a random seed.
It starts as just there is a game, but then so I guess for those who never had a Nintendo Entertainment System, you frequently had to take these cartridges out and blow in them to potentially get the dust off of all the little connectors in there. But what if every time you blew into the game changed in some unpredictable fashion, and so you kept getting these generations of the game?
So like the first one that comes to mind is like Spelunky, for example. Every time you play, it's a different game. It's the same kind of levels, but like the layout's going to be different. And you're just using a random number generator to generate a seed number that helps fill in all of the blanks. You want that to be based off of sensors from you blowing on the cartridge. It's the same thing as the wall of lava lamps doing the encryption keys.
Yes, an excellent example. And I don't know, maybe the Nintendo thing is cultural to some degree, because there's another article this week about Japan in general suggesting not so much generative AI here.
I wouldn't say Japan in general. I'd say less than half of the polled companies said that.
Well,
the article title that we read was more than 40% of Japanese companies have no plan to make use of AI. That means around 60, we'll say more than 50, have plans or already are. Supposedly 25% of companies already have
adopted AI. And we talked previously about the 3% of companies actually using it in a meaningful way.
But you used AI at all if in your company's day-to-day business you used autocomplete. I mean, I realize that seems a bit reductive. It's literally true. If you have, Microsoft Office open because Copilot's kind of integrated there. If you've got Google Docs open and it suggests the end of a sentence and you hit tab and you completed, you just used AI. I understand the idea behind an article like this is, and we're going to replace a bunch of people, or we're going to take this handmade process that someone's been doing for 1,000 years and turn it into a CNC machine instead. I get that's the idea that they're trying to make us think of, but using any AI, making use of AI, absolutely includes things as simple as I had it help me make some emails or summarize an email into some bullet points.
Sure.
The kind of things that we've talked about plenty, which is to say it's going to be so ubiquitous and so easy to use and so default on. A lot of people will be using AI without knowing it. And again, AI in this very nebulous sort of term where the autocomplete that you have on your phone now could be sold as AI. Yeah. Even if it isn't a large language model behind it. A hidden Markov model based, just like what's the percentage chance that this is the next word? You could totally sell that as AI. And it's just stats.
I'd suggest that most conditional logic, also sometimes referred to as skip logic, could be considered AI. Or a program is making a decision like a human would based upon some data input. It's not machine learning, and that's the distinction.
It's artificial and it's intelligence. It's making decisions. But Sam Altman could sell it for sure. He could sell us anything. Japan, more than 40% of companies have no plan to make use of AI. What I found interesting about that is that a large portion of companies, regardless of my pedantry there, are drawing their own line in the sand and saying, this won't help our specific use case, or we don't want it to be, quote unquote, helping. We don't want to replace people. We want to have this more artisanal aspect of the thing that we're making. I think that there's Japan or otherwise. I think there's something noble about saying, I'm going to do this the old fashioned way. Look at like the Amish, for example, here in the US. I'm
still waiting for their press release of the Amish say no to generative AI.
Amish GPT. No. Amish furniture. Everyone's heard of Amish furniture. Sure. And the connotation you have in your head is it's good. And then the sort of like implication below that, the subtext is they're doing it by hand, the old fashioned way. They're not using, modern day machines. Their stuff is better for it. That's how we're supposed to feel when you go and buy an Amish chair. Is this was made with blood, sweat, and tears by Jebediah, and no robots came anywhere near it. And that justifies the extra price and the extra time to get it and so on. And so if 40% of Japanese companies or X% of American companies or whoever say, we're just going to make our stuff totally by hand, there's always going to be a market for that, because there already has always been a market for anything done the old-fashioned way.
Or perhaps they just haven't seen all the great models that were released this week.
Oh my God.
There were just a few Yeah, I'll stick with it.
Christmas came this week. It was Christmas for AI, except the problem with this industry is Christmas keeps coming every other week.
And it's a little scary.
It is a little scary because it's
very
impossible
exciting
to keep with all of this stuff.
Scary. We'll start with something that's not super scary. You mentioned Sam Altman just a few seconds ago. They did come out with a new model, a GPT-4 Lite.
Yep. This kind of follows the same model that OpenAI has been doing, right? We have a bigger, way more capable new model. And now here's something that's nearly as good, and it's faster and it's cheaper. We saw it with GPT 3.5 Turbo and then 4 Turbo. And now 4.0 and 4.0 Mini. It's the same sort of. Google does the same kind of thing on the hardware front with their Pixel phones. Here's the Pixel 8. Now the Pixel 8a. It's nearly as good as our flagship, but cheaper. Same kind of thing going on here.
Of also, potential significance with this release is if you happen to have an account with them, you are granted a really significant number of hours is the wrong word, tokens to do fine tuning on there. They seem to be really promoting from a developer standpoint, fine tuning on 4.0. Mm-hmm. I guess, how would you describe fine tuning to our listeners at home?
Fine tuning is the closest thing that we have to teaching. It's the closest analog in my mind of taking a person who knows stuff about the world and then teaching them a new concept. Same thing for an LLM. A large language model is trained on gobs of text, as much as they can possibly throw at it. Don't worry too much about what trained on means. But then it's this static thing, unlike you and I, who learn stuff throughout the day and go to sleep and form memories and wake up a brand new person with more knowledge. An LLM doesn't do that. It has a context window of everything it already knew, a little bit of memory on top that it can, quote unquote, learn from, but then that gets purged all the time. Fine tuning is I took that LLM and either altered it or added a few little bits on top, like a fun little hat of knowledge, depending on the technique. Like LoRa, low order ranking adapter, is I take an LLM and then I put the fun little hat on it. A full fine tune is here is GPT-4 and we mixed its math around until it does better for my particular use case. I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure the people who are fine-tuning GPT 3.5 and 4 aren't actually fine-tuning the entire base model. It is so big, it would cost so much money to do. It's almost certainly that they're making some LoRa's or changing just a few layers at the end of the model, something like that.
Yeah, it's also really quick, which would again suggest that that's what's happening. I
really
have
quick instead of months and millions of dollars.
Yeah, with OpenAI before. This next one, Mistral came out with a new release. I think I've used Mistral's model maybe like once. Do you have more experience with Mistral?
Yeah. So Mistral, a French company, kind of originally came out of nowhere, and they still have. It's not quite like guerrilla marketing.
They're the ones that release their models via torrent primarily.
Yeah, they're just like somebody finds, here's a new one from them. There's no press release. It's just, here you go. This one did have a press release. So Mistral Large, what just came out is Mistral Large 2. Context first. Speaking of context windows, wink. Mistral Large was Mistral's largest model that had recently come out. Recently, I don't know, 6 months ago? Something like that. 1,000 years ago in LLM time. And that one was not released. They didn't have the weights available to download. They said, here's our big one, and we've got that as an API that you can pay money for, just like with ChatGPT or, GPT-4 via API.
But you could also download Mistral or the lower versions.
So they had some lower level ones that they made available, which is really cool. And it's bought them a lot of goodwill in the industry. Now, just 2 days ago, something like that, Mistral Large 2 was announced, and also here's the weights, which is absolutely wild, and I think it is in relation to what we'll talk about next, which is Meta and Llama 3.1. But as it relates to Mistral Large 2, it's got a big context window. Big context windows are really in these days, as well they should be. Mistral Large 2 is 123 billion parameters. That's big. I have a fairly beefy rig at home compared to like an average person's setup, shall we say.
What are your specs?
So I'm running a 3090, RTX 3090 from NVIDIA. That's my graphics card. So I have 24 gigs of RAM in that bad boy, and I have 64 gigs of regular RAM. That's more than most people have, and I can fit a quantized or smooshed 70 billion parameter model into memory for my computer and have it kind of chug. This is 123 billion. We talked a little bit about this in the last couple of episodes, which is to say you need a bigger boat, or the moat that a lot of these tech companies have isn't the quality or even the training data. It's that they made a thing that, frankly, you couldn't run yourself. And we'll just host it in the cloud for you, and you can just pay for access to it. And we're seeing more of that kind of thing by virtue of a couple of huge models coming out. So Mistral, the new large model is supposed to be really great. They released this really big version of it. There's also a couple of small ones that they've released.
One side before we get to the bigger release, I noticed in their press release, they talked about it outperforming Cloud 3 Opus. That's Anthropic's model. But that's actually not Anthropic's latest model. This is going back a couple weeks, but they released Sonnet, I believe.
3.5 Sonnet, which everybody is very excited about, myself included.
Yeah, I've been using, I slept on it when it first came out a little bit because I was just too busy with other things. But now the last 2 weeks, I've been using it very heavily.
The projects or artifacts?
Yes, artifacts are very cool. So, yeah.
Because this is something that really excited me about Claude.
I've only used it from a writing code perspective. I don't know to what degree I imagine it works in other contexts too, if you're writing something,
PDFs and stuff for like reference against a thing.
The idea is that you're working on something. That's the artifact. So from a coding perspective, it is a file with code in it, or potentially multiple files with code in it. And so you initially make an ask of the AI. Here's the thing that I am trying to do. Can you write some code for me that would accomplish this task? Or you could imagine it writing a text document that describes what I'm trying to present. And then you have follow-up questions where you want to refine that document. And it keeps the document and it goes back and it refines this document. So there is the conversation that you are having, and then there is the file or files. It can do multiple files that it is producing. And that is in a separate interface. It's on the same web page, but a separate window. And it's versioned. So you can go back and move through the different versions. And then when you're ready to use this artifact, you can copy and paste it back in your document. And
this feels like collaboration with an AI much more than ChatGPT. With the recipe that I did, it spat out a new version of the recipe every time, which was fine. But having, here is the recipe that we're working on together, and watching the edits come into that feels like an entirely different game.
So the artifacts are really cool from a coding perspective. It seems to have more up-to-date information on the latest documentation for a lot of popular libraries. So when you are asking it a question specific to a programming framework, it is more likely to be up to date on that than, I guess, the one that I would use would be 4.0.
October 2023, I think.
Yes, but it just seems like they've incorporated more of that training data into their data set. I'm getting better, more relevant answers that are more current. One of the things I frequently find when using OpenAI's models is that some of their answers are using deprecated function calls. In other words, the answer was correct a year or 2 years ago, but it is not correct with the latest releases. So that's been good. And then I've generally found it to be quite fast. So yes, I use the Claude interface, but I also use a program called Cursor, which is my development environment. So that's when you're writing code, and it integrates the model into the application. So whenever I'm troubleshooting an error or I have a question, all of those go directly through now Claude 3 Sonnet. Although it's cool in Cursor, you can, for everything that you can do, there's always a drop down. You can switch which model you want to use. So it's very easy to compare results. Or sometimes I've had examples where I get something that doesn't work and I'll just switch the model and I'll get something that works from another model. So anyways, slight diversion into Claude 3 Sonnet, which is worth checking out. But now to the main event. Mark Zuckerberg is back. His rebranding is complete now with his kind of fro-like hair and surfing in Hawaii with American flags and releasing the greatest open source model of all time.
Weighing in at a whopping 405 billion parameters. This bad boy is supposedly smashing some large benchmarks, allegedly outperforming like ChatGPT's GPT-4o. It's allegedly outperforming Anthropic's Claude 3.5 Sonnet, at least in certain benchmarks, at least in certain things. Let's actually take another quick diversion. One of the leaderboards that I know I've talked about on this podcast, the LMSys leaderboards, I've started to see some discussions surrounding it, which is to say we can't trust them anymore. Certain models that other people are like, I swear to you, this definitely is the better model, is being outperformed by some other one on the LMSys leaderboard.
Was that the same leaderboard that OpenAI was sort of like leaking their new models on?
They were basically testing it out to see how people were responding to it. That always felt a little fishy.
Like it, I don't know. Did you get those? You were like, okay, never mind. Back to your story. Back to your story.
So the gist that I'm seeing, a bit of a consensus being built among the community, is that leaderboard is now not a great leaderboard to really rely on, because all of these top models are so good, the average person is having increasingly large amounts of difficulty determining which is better, and certainly which is better from a holistic perspective. Maybe I liked this one better for this one use case, but it isn't for all these other ones, etc. The average person is no longer a good differentiator between which model is better, which is kind of wild to think about.
Well, that also makes sense. When we worked together and we built models that would identify things, it was primarily events happening in the news. I'll keep it at that high level. There would often be tremendous debate amongst the humans about whether or not this event that was identified was actually that event or was it something else. So the concept of people disagreeing over the subtlety, as the things get better, people's opinions sort of grow wider and wider because you start arguing about the subtle points rather than the broad picture.
Right. I ran into this problem without even having disagreement among other people. This was disagreement with myself at a different previous job where it was a now defunct social startup. But looking at like, I was trying to detect
conversation in the third person.
No, but I was ruining myself in the past, kind of shaking my fist. Daniel, looking for cyberbullying type messages on this social network. And there was a data set of these ones aren't. And then something got flagged and you go through, this was the most relevant related thing. Well, looking at it now, maybe I guess that shouldn't count as. So, right, we get into this really gray area.
What is cyberbullying?
Is
like, we all have a broad idea,
yeah.
But like what specifically?
So you have to have these huge data sets of like tests or weird riddles that you're running up against LLMs instead of, I asked it for Corn Canelés and I liked this recipe better. It's getting harder to determine which of these LLMs is better. So all of that back to Meta and Llama 3.1, this absolutely humongous model that is at least allegedly doing really, really, really well. Not that anyone's able to run this on their own home computer.
Yeah, I have 128 gigs of RAM and I can't run it. However, I have seen people with 2 MacBooks, because there's now a program where you can distribute across multiple Macs and kind of create your own home lab. Over 2 MacBooks, in theory, I could run it. So this is now, in my head, it's like, do I need to buy another computer so I can run this model?
Yep. I mean, maybe. So this model is in that class of too big for reasonable home use, but you can get access to it over API. And like the fact that this is being released freely to people, I think is somewhat the antithesis almost of where we thought the industry was headed 1 year ago. Because OpenAI, we've got this very closed ecosystem of you've just got to pay us for access to this really great kind of model. And now OpenAI, not OpenAI, the company, is potentially outperforming OpenAI. That's a large shift in the industry. And I think OpenAI is going to be running scared a little bit because they don't have a moat. What is your moat if it's just make a bigger, slightly more capable model? Maybe they don't have one anymore, especially if folks like Meta are going to come out and say, here's this huge one. Now, granted, is Meta doing this to try and kill off potential competition?
In part, yes.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely part of what they're doing. But you can't deny the benefits to the industry that are coming along with it. I don't know. It's a weird thing to be celebrating, but it is nice that instead of you cannot have access to this model, is here it is. And also here's a 70 billion and a 8 or 9 billion parameter model that you would be able to run locally. So it's not just this gigantic one, kind of like Mistral. Here's the really big one. Here's a couple of small ones that came out from it. I'm hearing fantastic things from the smaller 70 billion whatever parameter models of Llama 3.1 as well. The hits just keep on coming.
I've used it a tiny bit running on top of Grok, and I can't speak to the quality. The quality seemed fine in my examples, but the speed was really noticeable. I mean, more almost instant responses where you're getting, 10 pages of text instantly in response to your text. That was the most.
This is with a Q.
Yes.
And not their whole deal is we're going to be hosting these humongous models very quickly for you, as opposed to I'm running on my home network and I'm getting 1 token per second.
Yeah, and it is really quick. But perhaps it is a systemic risk to society.
So we've talked some about not just regulation, but also the kind of concept of a capable enough AI potentially posing a risk with its capabilities of allowing illegal things, helping exploit zero-day vulnerabilities for computers, that kind of thing. Why would Llama 3 be called a systemic risk to society? And systemic risk, like in quotation marks, where does that come from?
Well, it comes from the European Union's AI Act guidelines, where I guess models of a certain size, you have to notify them that you've been playing in this realm before you release it, because they've determined that anything that uses this degree of computing power to train could potentially be a systemic risk to society, and therefore they have to be kept in the loop on these things.
Right. So there's a specific number that they came up with, 10 to the 25 flops, floating point operations, which is so far removed from any real meaningful number to me that it might as well be nothing. But the idea being you could only use so much compute to make something before it is possibly too intelligent. And I mean literally too intelligent, too capable, too able to do bad things. And Llama is almost 4 times as big as that number that they put up. Well, not the model itself, but rather the amount of compute to train that 405 billion parameter model.
Right.
Does that mean that it's just something that they need to warn the AI or warn the EU about, or is Meta not allowed to release this in the EU?
It's a gray area right now, and that's why we were also seeing articles. We talked about it last week. We may have talked about it before. It's still in the news now that Apple was the other example where they're holding back certain features because of this sort of unclear regulatory landscape that's out there. We don't know, and we also there's also a realm of it feels like they think it's kind of stupid, so it's like, okay, like, oh, and they're just not engaging. Fine, no AI for you. It's the AI Nazi. No AI for you. You've asked too many questions.
Seinfeld reference. Speaking of some really timely references, yeah.
Seinfeld is still relevant. Well, I guess, and the EU is not necessarily alone. We aren't there quite yet in the US, but even as OpenAI has been releasing new models, I guess it's technically a subset of the Senate sent a letter to Altman this week with a whole bunch of questions, but including that is wanting the US to be able to review new models coming out of OpenAI before they go to the general public. Not necessarily under a legal framework. It's just sort of hey, it would be nice if you shared these models and gave the US government a preview of them before they went out. But the subtext is that we may soon have something similar to the EU, where at a minimum you need to notify them, and inevitably it might evolve into a process of reviewing and certifying models to be able to be released.
That's right. So of these questions, the first half dozen are related to like, what are the cybersecurity protocols? I'll read this one verbatim. Can you confirm that your company will not enforce permanent non-disparagement agreements for current and former employees? Yeah, they've been in the news for this non-disparagement agreement. I think absolutely rightfully so under the gun for this. But after that first half dozen or so, you get into, will OpenAI commit to making its next foundation model available to U.S. government agencies for pre-deployment testing, review, analysis, and assessment? Wink, wink, wink.
Yeah, I was going to say,
like,
Daniel's doing a lot of winking while he's reading
this. Can we
one.
have it ahead of time and like, can we have it? And then also, what are the post-release monitoring practices? Another one verbatim. Do you plan to make retrospective impact assessments of your already deployed models available to the public? So it's bookended by, security, and are you going to like do some super shady stuff with your employees? And will you let us know about some transparent insights to safety and so on? And also, hey, can we have the next one ahead of time before anyone else gets it?
And right, we've talked before that they now have the former head of the NSA on their board, which would already suggest that they're getting early access to these things.
Right.
I guess there is a conspiracy theory here where this is all theater, and they'll go back and forth in order to create this relationship where they do get. In other words, perhaps it's already been decided that they're going to get this access, as demonstrated by the NSA is literally on their board of directors, where they get the earliest access.
Now they just need a paper trail being like, we went through the whole due process. We're going through this public thing and coming to this agreement, and then they roll it out to every other company. Right? This is the public version. OpenAI agrees without legislation. Then they codify that agreement in legislation. Right. And then when again, it's actually a strong arm. Some shady stuff that OpenAI is trying to stifle competition. And I don't know if they're running scared yet, but with like the release of this Llama 3 model, I wonder if the walls could start crashing down around OpenAI.
You mentioned the non-disparagement agreement, which has been in the press a lot. That essentially when you work for, which is honestly not an odd thing in the tech industry, but when you work for OpenAI, you have to sign something that says you won't talk bad about them. And then when you leave, you have to sign it again with the threat that if you ever say anything bad about the company, you're going to lose all of your stock, which at OpenAI is worth quite a lot. Another question in here was about the whistleblowers part of this agreement that you have to sign. So again, when you work for OpenAI, you have to agree that if you ever become a federally protected whistleblower, that the financial incentive that comes with that. So if you whistleblow and the government goes out and collects money, you get a percentage of that money. I think it's between 10 and 30% if it's at least $1 million. And OpenAI requires you to agree in advance that if you ever get that money, you'll give it to OpenAI. You release your claim to that money and you award it to OpenAI. So yes, because they can't make it illegal for you to be a whistleblower, but they can make it not illegal. They can take away the financial incentive because you've already awarded those rights. So you can't do it for the money. You only have to do it because it's right inside.
Also to say, hey, you're whistleblowing us for doing some bad or illegal or whatever things, and then we get fined $1 zillion for it. We get to keep that 30% or whatever of the money. We get a refund on our slap on the wrist. That seems not great. But that's why OpenAI has been in the news a bunch for these non-disparagement agreements. And it seems like enough of the spotlight's been on them that they're starting to walk back from that.
Yeah. Well, again, sticking with the OpenAI theme, there's another story in this news this week that they might be burning around $5 billion a year, meaning they're not making money, but they're losing right around $5 billion. And it's got to come from training and running all these models.
Right.
Now, I don't know that this
it's not
is true.
Spending, it's losing $5 billion. That's,
correct.
Yeah, a loss of $5 billion.
Right. They're not making. Yes.
Right. So
at the end of the year, they have $5 billion less than they had at the beginning of the year.
I don't know if this was actually from OpenAI, the numbers, but some estimates were saying the training and inference costs could be $7 billion, which is ludicrous. And then staffing, $1.5 billion. I know there's a lot of money being thrown at all the people that work there. staffing of just the people working there, $1.5 billion. Holy moly. That's a lot.
Well, we hear yes, and we don't know how they came up with the numbers. Like there could be lots of creative accounting here, especially if they're counting in the stock. So they're saying, okay, sure. There are lots of 7-figure salaries at OpenAI because it's been reported from many engineers have reported having a 7-figure salary there. However, if they also are incorporating the value of the stock and as part of their compensation, I could see how that gets up to 1.5 billion a lot easier than if they aren't including stock compensation as part of it. And the stock compensation is, a little wiggly area. The same with the money that they're spending. We know that they have a deal with Microsoft, who took a significant percentage of the company and is able to use their models in order to leverage Microsoft's extensive server farms to train their models. So wonder,
are they really spending that much money?
Correct.
Or is that's what the spend would have been if they were getting bills from Azure?
Correct. And going back to creative accounting, so something that's not terribly uncommon to see, is an agreement where something like this. So OpenAI says to Microsoft, we are going to spend, I'll use the $5 billion number. We will assign a contract for $5 billion a year in order to use your servers. At the same time, Microsoft signs a contract with OpenAI that says we will spend $5 billion in order to license your technology to be so that we can leverage your models in Copilot. And so both companies have $5 billion contracts, which their investors can be. And public markets can take the stock price to the moon, but no actual cash changed hands. It's an effective, net even. Microsoft potentially lost money, but they had the servers anyways. They were sitting around, and so they've used up that server capacity. And yes, OpenAI
sign a $5 billion deal with somebody
with each other. We could do it. Yes, yeah, we could
handshake on it right now.
About $5 billion a year.
Mine just went through the roof. Am I traded?
Just create a meme coin and
yeah.
So it could be this. It could be that OpenAI. What this article suggested is that unless something changes in the next year, OpenAI could be going out of business. I call BS on it. It sets off my BS meter. It's journalists sensationalizing things unless they show us the receipts, which they did not do in this article.
So they talk about an uncertain path to profitability. There is a gigantic money pit of more GPUs that everything is.
We talked about it last week.
Right.
And the week before.
$1 zillion for all of these big companies is going into, we need a ton of GPUs to train these sorts of things. This is not a huge amount of, there's money coming into the companies that make them available over API and so on. I'm pretty sure they are not net positive on this. I suspect these partnerships are absolutely where this is going to be subsidized through. So OpenAI, if they weren't being fed money via Microsoft, or at least fed not having to spend the money on the GPUs themselves, they would probably go out of money. I don't think that this is a profitable venture, but they don't need to be profitable. Microsoft, which has more money than God, can say, we want to have the best models out there. We've got, you came up with ChatGPT, GPT-4, GPT-4o. We're hitching our horse to your wagon or vice versa. And that's the partnership. And so now OpenAI plus Microsoft, it doesn't matter much that OpenAI is a gigantic money pit as long as they keep having the best stuff available.
Which they may or may not.
Right. And so if Meta releases something that could be just as good that you quote unquote could run locally or just spin up some server farm yourself and have your own instance of it where you don't have to spend anything to OpenAI, then I think there starts to be a lot more of side-eyeing one another at Microsoft and OpenAI saying, oh shoot, that thing that we were paying you $1 zillion for, the moat was not having more training data. It wasn't having this, it wasn't having that. It was having the best model. And that's not really a moat because every other week, another gigantic model comes out or a reasonably sized model or a small model. We haven't even talked about the Microsoft releases. Speaking of, like OpenAI, totally separate from them. The Microsoft folks have been releasing, what's it called? Gemma?
Yes. Apple's also been releasing models.
Yeah. The first
Again,
couple of
also small
Microsoft
models.
ones, some stumbling blocks, but apparently I haven't tried them myself. The more recent releases from Microsoft are really good, punching above their weight in their weight class of however many billions of parameters.
Right, because we're also racing towards having models that we can run locally, because that is one way that they can cut down dramatically on the cost. When I can just install a program on an average computer and most things don't need to go out to the cloud, the costs plummet, which is a good thing.
Yeah, I'm already paying for the electricity to run my computer.
Right.
I might as well get this thing chugging at max capacity.
You just don't want to pay for the AI button on your laptop.
I super don't. I think that like we're seeing bigger is a path toward better, smaller is a path toward better, faster is a path toward better, cheaper, whether, if I'm paying it over API is better. And we're seeing all of these directions and more being approached
All
simultaneously.
All in the race to become self-aware.
Did we do it?
I
Are
think
we
we
at the end
did.
of the episode?
You've been listening to episode 24 of They Might Be Self-Aware. Just take a moment to breathe that in.
Don't take a moment. You should be going right now to whatever podcasting platform, whether it be Spotify or Apple or some of those other ones that definitely come to mind. YouTube. You can see some of us on TikTok if you want. That's always fun.
And hit the subscribe button. It's free. And plus,
give us some stars and thumbs.
You tune the algorithm to get more content. Like, even if you don't, you're like, I'm a little undecided on this one, but I like this genre. Go ahead and hit the subscribe button. It'll help the algorithm. You'll start getting better results. You want to know more cool stuff? Maybe just not us. You should still hit subscribe. For you two non-subscribers out there, shame on you.
Not much shame.
Okay, all right. You can listen without subscribing. We don't. It's not a hard requirement, and indeed we do have. We're like at maybe a 6-to-1 ratio of listeners to subscribers. 6 times the listeners than subscribers. But I'd like to see a few more.
1-to-1.
Yeah, something close to that. Anyways, I think that's gonna wrap it up for this week. But we will be back next week. Big news. We'll be back next week with more incredibly insightful takes on everything that is happening in this wonderful, wonderful world of AI. But until next time,
They might be self-aware.